Good afternoon, community. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Kathleen St. Louis Caliento, and I have the privilege of serving as president and CEO of Cara Collective. Welcome to our Conversations with Cara discussion in honor of Fair Chance Month. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term fair chance hiring, you're probably more familiar with second chance hiring, which refers to employers that hire individuals who have been involved with the justice system. At Cara Collective, we say fair chance hiring because it acknowledges that not everyone has actually had access to equal opportunities, especially residents returning from incarceration. Think about it. You aren't in need of a second chance if you've never had a first chance because of systems and factors you could not control leading up to your involvement with the justice system. Our goal here is to shift the narrative entirely to recognize justice involved individuals, not for their mistakes, but for the gifts that they bring to our communities and workplaces. This year, the U.S. Department of Justice estimates about 600,000 people will return home from incarceration. That's 1 in 3 adults who are justice involved and carry a record that severely limits their access to opportunities. And at Cara Collective, 78% of our motivated and talented job seekers have been involved with the justice system in some capacity. We have an opportunity and an obligation to make sure that our justice involved friends and neighbors have what they need to succeed, no matter if it's their first, second, or 100th chance at achieving the best that life has to offer. So in our conversation today, we're going to focus on a couple of things. First, being the realities, right? The realities of our justice involved individuals who are navigating obstacles like limited housing, employment options, and others. We're also going to talk about what we can do on a systems level through policy change to create more fair chance opportunities right here in Chicago. And finally, we'll unpack why and how employers should adopt fair chance hiring to strengthen their workforce and their communities. So I'm very excited to have joining me for this conversation today 3 champions of fair chance hiring. I'm thrilled to welcome Kelly Burlage, the VP of Talent Acquisition at Lineage, Brian Faves, Managing Director of Corporate Coalition of Chicago, and Joseph Mapp, Director of Reentry for the City of Chicago. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you because you are front runners in a lot of the work that we're doing here. But before we get started, I want to encourage everyone tuning in, please submit any questions that you might have through this conversation in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can during our Q&A portion. Okay, we're going to jump right in. This question is for everyone, but Brian, I'm going to kick it to you to start things off for us. What's your experience with fair chance hiring, and why are businesses and so many people like yourselves advocates for it?
So speaking from a business perspective, I think businesses are advocating for this and involved in fair chance hiring for 2 basic reasons. Number one is you mentioned it, Kathleen. You said 1 out of 3 working age Americans has some involvement in the criminal justice system. That could be an arrest, a conviction record, it could be incarceration. But in addition to the 600,000 or so returning from incarceration, this is tens of millions of people in this country. And if that record is a barrier to employment, companies are losing out on a vast amount of talent. So that to me is reason number 1. And that's common across all the companies we work with. The other side is it's the right thing to do. It's obviously good for people who are involved in the justice system. It's good for their communities. It's good for the economy. It's good for capitalism. Capitalism is based on the creative potential of the population to be involved. And if you are excluding a third of that creative potential, think about how many inventions are not being invented, how much innovation is not being innovated if we're excluding that group. So I think there's another reason in the right to do, which is that employees who are in companies that are actively tapping fair chance talent are usually proud that it is something people want to have humanity in their work, and they want to be at companies that do this kind of work. We recently surveyed 1,100 Chicagoans in a representative survey asking what they expect from business leaders. And more than 80% said they expect business leaders to be investing in communities, to be hiring people from disinvested communities, to be investing in good jobs. Like, this is all wrapped up in what people want their employers to do. So you have to have a business reason for it to be sustainable, but all these other things are really important.
I couldn't agree more, Brian. Kelly, let me turn to you. What's your experience with fair chance hiring? Why are so many people like yourself such an advocate for it?
Well, don't make me go after Brian, first of all. Okay. um, well, first of all, fair chance hiring is something I'm obviously very passionate about. Everyone here is. But I've seen just the power that it brings when you get the support and the second chance that these individuals deserve. And you mentioned the second, the third, or however many chances that it takes. But it completely changes their life. And honestly, it strengthens not only the individual, but the companies that also take that chance too. We here at Lineage have seen that firsthand. And I know we'll get into that later. But, I've watched specific people overcome huge barriers and turn into some of the most loyal, hardworking team members that you can get. And, those turn into data points, right? And facts and things like retention and engagement that companies really want to be a part of, which are some of the white paper and justification that companies want to bring from a business perspective, which brings that advocacy into the conversation. But, it's not just about doing the right thing, which is what Brian said, but it's about unlocking the talent and building stronger teams and also community partnerships. And, we at Lineage have been really lucky to partner with Cara with respect to Cara, but it's that's what helped us to be an advocate was the incredible partnership that we had with your organization. So that's why we're an advocate.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And Joseph, Kelly mentioned some great points there, and in particular, just how it's really helping to change some of the statistics that we're seeing. And I know you're seeing this at the city level too. Tell us what your experience is with fair chance hiring and why you're such an advocate for it.
Thank you for that question. So, for two reasons, both professionally and personally. Professionally, this is a priority to our mayor, Brandon Johnson. He recognized the decades of disinvestment that has happened to our communities, and he wants to level set that and give everyone equal opportunity to obtain employment, not just employment, but employment that offers the opportunity to earn a sustainable wage. Second is personally. Now, my personal, and this drives a lot of my work, it centers a lot of my work. I have been fortunate enough to lead different organizations and departments as it relates to reentry services. And in this, I wanted to develop my educational opportunities. So I wanted to extend my education by going to graduate school. And although I managed millions of dollars in budgets, I applied for a warehouse employment and was denied because of a 30-year-old conviction. What that identified to me is that there's no time limit to convictions or being system impacted. And everyone, despite whether they've managed $2 million budgets or even looking for the opportunity for the first time, should be given a chance to obtain employment. It benefits not only the individual, but families, communities in our the greater Chicagoland area. And I'm an advocate for fair chance hiring because everyone deserves the opportunity to show who they are today, not be judged forever by their worst mistakes. When people are given a real when people are given a real opportunity at employment, it strengthens everyone, as I mentioned before. It's about recognizing value, potential, and resilience. I am living proof of what's possible when someone is given the opportunity, and I believe everyone should be given that opportunity. I shouldn't be an exception to the rule. I
Right.
should be a normal.
That's right. That's right, Joseph. And you raised such an important point. Thank you so much for just connecting us to some of your personal story too. And we know this, right? That justice involved folks navigate an incredible number of barriers, as you just mentioned, regardless of the experience and sort of the reform, all of the things that they've changed in their lives. We've also at Cara Collective seen an increase in the need to bridge the gap in mental health resources, right, for our
Yeah.
justice involved job seekers at Cara. We have talked to employers who still have misconceptions about fair chance hiring and who they might be hiring into their roles. So, have you seen a shift in some of these barriers or misconceptions that are keeping justice-involved individuals from living a good life, quite honestly? Brian, I'll start with you again. What have you seen as some of these persistent barriers and misconceptions?
Yeah. So thanks for phrasing the question that way, because my observation is they're more persistent than changing. My hope is that they will change over time. But I think there's several types of misperceptions. One is just, what does it mean to have a record in this country? I mean, I will tell you that when my kids went up on an abandoned building where I live and the cops found them, we got a call from the cops. They have no record. If that happens in a different community in this city, those kids now have a record. Right? So just what it means to have a record is a real misperception in this country. The second is, if you have a record, by the way, the vast majority have never been incarcerated. Like, most people don't recognize that, but there's still all these perceptions about having a record. And the third, whether you're incarcerated or not, Joseph is an incredible individual, but he is in fact not special, in the sense of the vast majority have one thing, are indistinguishable from a risk standpoint compared to the general population. Yet companies spend all their time trying to find the exceptions who might be a higher risk, as opposed to trying to identify the vast majority of people with records who pose zero statistical risk compared to the rest of the population. So just we miss on all three levels. That's about sort of the people. There's another side, though, on perception, I think, that I want to call out, in particular the business community, which is, I think there's a misperception about what the laws say we can and cannot do. I mean, I still run into financial institutions who say, we are a regulated industry, therefore we cannot hire anyone with a record. To which I usually say, there's that small bank down the street, JP Morgan, if you've heard of them, like 10% of their new hires every year have records. Like, it's so easy to say we can't, the law says we can't, and people don't look into that, and that's just a perception they have. They don't bother challenging. We're trying to change those over time. Yeah. And then there are things you mentioned, housing. I think other people should pick up. There are other things that are happening in the world out there. Other people.
Thank you. And Kelly, I know you've been a champion at Lineage. Joseph, were you going to say something? I didn't want to interrupt there.
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on Brian. I think the biggest misperception for me is they identify people that's returning back to community as risk to be managed, right, instead of people to invest in. If we can change the narrative around how we view or how we talk about this population, we can begin to change how we respond to them and how we recognize that this is a talent pool that everyone can benefit from.
That's right. And Joseph, I'll just stay with you since you've picked it up there. I mean, what are some of these additional kind of supports, right? These aren't risks to be managed. It's thinking about what are the supports that they need, right? And so I know we talked a little about mental health. What are some of the continued systemic barriers that you're seeing to folks in the fair chance space?
So I think these barriers are no different than what we learned in elementary school with Maslow hierarchy of needs. The most basic needs are met, people are able to self-actualize. So when we're responding to housing, when we're talking about creating opportunities for housing, you mentioned mental health, which is important in this. That shouldn't be stigmatized as there's a flaw with individuals, but that's another way of supporting people through some of the challenges that they've faced. We think about transportation. We think about the host education, everything that you can possibly think of, and it will behoove me if I do not mention that these individualized success plans are important, because every individual that's returning back into our society do not have the same challenges or do not face them. I don't want us to get into the mind frame of thinking it's a one size fits all, but thinking about how can we create supportive accesses or supportive opportunities for the returning population.
That's great. Thank you, Joseph. And Kelly, let me come back to you, because I know you've been such a champion of fair chance hiring at Lineage. What are some of the misperceptions and misconceptions that you're seeing that you've sort of had to try to battle even in your own work?
Yeah, I think that Brian and Joseph did a great job of summing a lot of them up, but I think a lot of them are, the occupational licensing restrictions. I think the big one that we struggle with is the lack of digital literacy. And Cara does a great job. I mean, just speaking for your organization, of the technical skills that are needed behind and the, reintroduction after incarceration, making it difficult to come back into the workforce and the market demands and aligning those. I think the social stigma is a big one, and kind of the ignorance that goes along with the social stigma. Another one, as simple as it sounds, is just the ID and the documentation gaps of someone being able to just obtain an ID and birth certificates and social security numbers needed. And also healthcare. I'll speak to this one a little bit later, but just a lot of individuals lose healthcare access while incarcerated, and they face, being able to get re-enrollment post-release. And so a lot of those things go along with just another barrier, and just continuing to make it very difficult for them. And, from an employer perspective, the fear of, there's always the money fear, right? So the negligent hiring fear of lawsuits that can deter employers from being a little bit uneasy about hiring individuals for fear that there's going to be some kind of litigation as a result of it, and the misnomers around that.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the work I know, Brian, you and your team try to do to help dispel a lot of these misperceptions. Because I think to your point, Kelly, they are fears, and I think to help to sort of arm people with data and the research that we've done around this to help dispel some of these misconceptions is really critical.
Absolutely.
And as each of you are talking about some of the important supports and needs that are necessary to help change perceptions, but provide the supports that our returning residents need, we realize that a lot of the work that we do is incredibly steeped in deep partnerships to be able to provide those kinds of supports, right? We know that our job seekers need. We know that we can be somewhat of the experts in workforce development, but we have to rely on partners to help us think about those wraparound supports and those holistic supports. We think about our partners like Cabrini Green Legal Aid for legal assistance, right? And CTS Health for the mental health services that we just talked about earlier. And we want to figure out how can we use that hub with job seekers to get everything they need. But some of those things that we know require more than just sort of some of those supports, right? To remove some of those obstacles and barriers, it takes everyone, including city government, right? So Joseph, I want to come to you here because we've started to look at ways that Cara Collective can support change through even policy, right? Thinking about lending our insight and support, for example, to ensure electronic monitoring that doesn't prevent folks from getting employment. We ran into this as a particular barrier at our social enterprise Clean Slate, which provides transitional jobs and exterior maintenance. But because of that electronic monitoring, participants employed at Clean Slate may be limited in neighborhoods where they can and cannot work, therefore limiting some of their income and employment opportunities with us and with other employment partners. So that was just one example of a specific barrier and a policy that we were trying to help address. Joseph, I would love to just hear from you a little bit about some of the steps the city of Chicago is taking to support justice-involved individuals and what more they can do.
Yes, thank you for that question. So currently, the city of Chicago has began and already has in place what's called a 7-year look back period. So 5-year look back, meaning if you have a conviction that's more than 5 years old, it would not be held against you or it would not be considered unless it's directly related to the job that you're applying for. And that's the same thing for the 7. It's 5 years for all city departments, 7 years for City Hall. Secondly, we're also working with the Department of Human Resources to all new job postings will have clear language that's encouraging those who are system impacted to apply for any posting that they have qualifications for. This is to build community trust and to allow individuals who are system impacted to recognize they have the same accessibility as any other Chicagoan. Thirdly, we're working with the Illinois Department of Corrections, Cook County Jail, adult probation, and adult parole to try to develop policies that can be more inclusive and welcoming and be more flexible to allow people to, like you said, some of the challenges that they face to be able to seek employment where there were barriers. to make sure that we recognize that it's not solely left on the mayor's office of reentry, because it's not one office, not one individual can actually come up with a solution. We're really being intentional about developing relationships, cross-sector relationships. As an example of that, we've partnered with the Corporate Coalition and encouraged 2 other city departments to be involved as we review policies and practices from their member corporations, as well as review policies and practices from city departments, so we can enhance hiring opportunities. I think this is not a one size fit all, and I have to keep going back to that because it takes multiple points of touch points to begin to resolve and pull back some of these barriers that's been prohibiting individuals from actually thriving.
I couldn't agree more. And please, Brian.
Well, I wanted to add that we're thrilled to work with Joseph and his colleagues, but that work is also in collaboration, Kathleen, with your colleagues, which I think is just another demonstration of Joseph's point that this takes all sectors working together.
That's absolutely right. All sectors working together. And I think, Joseph, to your point too, it can't just rest at the city level, right? We were very lucky to work with Willette Benford when she was the director of reentry at the city level. And she's now working at the state to do very similar things, working now focused on the female carceral system and thinking about ways to ensure that they're getting the supports that they need. So I couldn't agree with you more. And the importance of government and policy to really help move the needle forward as it pertains to fair chance hiring. And I think because of our current political landscape, I think there's some risks potentially, right? In terms of some of the work that we have done to move the needle forward. And so, I kind of want to open it up to back to you, Joseph, and I'll open it up to everyone else too. But what do you think might be at risk for fair chance initiatives, and how could this impact justice involved individuals, just given our current political landscape? What would you like to see there?
Thank you. I'd say from a policy perspective, what is at risk is the momentum that we've already built. I think fair chances is important to identify, but there are other challenges as well that this population face. And if we do not find ways to defragment our landscape and become more inclusive in our approaches to resolving these problems, that will be the greatest threat. No matter what's happening on the political landscape, it takes us to identify ways of collaborating and being inclusive, and that's including those who are directly impacted as not only contributing to the conversation, but also leading some of the work. I would like to see stronger commitment embedding reentry into every policy, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, whether it's city, state, or county, or anything in between. I think that is important. We must recognize that this returning population should not constantly be marginalized as a other type of group or population, but they should be considered as Chicagoans. And when we support Chicagoans, we build a better city for us all. And Brian alluded to it. If you do a poll, and based off the latest research, 1 in every 2 Americans are connected to someone, either as a family member, a loved one, or just a friend whose system impacted. So instead of looking at it as some distant person from a distant community, we have to recognize that it's our neighbors, our friends, and our family. And if we begin to change the mindset into how we view one another, we'll be more willing to support and change the draft policies that actually create equitable accessibility.
I couldn't agree more. And Brian, this is something that you're pushing policy too, or at least thinking about it, I know, and not only just thinking about it at the government level, but internal company policy too. Like what's at risk? What's at risk here, given some of the momentum that we've seen with fair chance hiring?
Well, a couple thoughts. The first is, you said, given the political environment, I actually think there's a potential opportunity here, given the political environment, which is to recognize that the challenge of fair chance hiring is a white rural problem almost as much as it is a urban communities of color problem. So there's actually some common ground there that maybe we can build on in terms of the national scene. I do think that the challenges in funding are going to make things more difficult locally. But I think when we think about policy, we try to encourage companies that they have control over a lot of what happens. Yes, there are licensure challenges that Kelly brought up that need to be addressed, uh, there are legislative solutions that we need to pursue. But companies have a lot of control over the look back period, as Joseph said, over how they market jobs that are open to people with records. A lot of people with records aren't unemployed, they're underemployed in multiple low wage jobs. And they don't have time to apply for a better job if they don't think they're going to get a fair shake in it. So there's a lot that companies have from a policy standpoint that is under their control.
Great, thank you. And Kelly, turning to you, I'm curious what you think are some specific policies that you would like to see to make fair chance hiring more widely and easily adopted at the corporate level.
Yeah, and Brian's totally right. I think companies do have a bit of an upper hand in terms of, number one, what they can evolve and what they can change. But some things I'd like to see, I mean, certainly I'd love to see permanent, more expanded tax incentives for fair chance hiring. I think it would make the conversation a little bit easier for organizations that haven't dabbled in that area to be an easier one for getting organizations to get their arms around it. I think national reforms to open up licensed professions to justice impacted individuals would be great to see. I also think, a big conversation point is around automation, artificial intelligence, hiring tools to prevent bias. So I'd love to see oversight on audits on those tools. And I can speak more to that, but there has to be better rigor around that right now for individuals that are already facing barriers to employment. This is just another barrier. So for me, that would be one I would love to see going forward.
Yeah. And say a little bit more about that, Kelly. What would you like to see that look like? We have some time here, so I would love to hear you say that.
So from an education standpoint, a lot of organizations jumped into the deep end of the pool with tools that really, they thought would make recruiters' lives easier. So they use applicant tracking systems and have leveraged artificial intelligence screening tools, what they thought was going to make their lives easier. But what it did do was it really just completely decimated the opportunity for individuals that had barriers. It did things like, oh, this person has a gap in their employment for 2 years. Well, why did they have a gap of employment? Well, the screener would then screen them out. And by doing so, that's eliminated a lot of the individuals that would normally have an opportunity to be hired. And by introducing reform in this area, that would obviously, create some rigor in this area. And so creating some oversight and audits within AI hiring tools would prevent that from happening.
That is a really, really great example, because I think that, we, in the age of efficiency, we're looking at ways to kind of make the job easier, move things along, but not realizing how we're screening very capable, very talented talent out of the pool so I think this is a way where technology can actually help us be a little bit better and think about how to be much more specific and strategic about how we're identifying folks. So thank you for that. I'd love to talk a little bit more. We've talked sort of at the policy level and just at the individual level. Would love to hear about how companies are already utilizing fair chance hiring to strengthen their workforce. Kelly, you're already talking about some things that you'd like to see. What are some things that Lineage is already doing? I know that you've employed at least 10 justice-involved Cara job seekers at Lineage. Would love to hear about what you're already doing to help strengthen your workforce by utilizing fair chance hiring employees.
Yeah, so first of all, we've had a fantastic relationship with many organizations from a second chance recidivism and just a fair chance perspective. But, how we started the process. So I'll start with that. So we didn't just start, right? Like we probably experienced the same things that many people that are listening to this experience. Like, well, we can't just start. Organizations met with resistance, or like, well, we can't just open the door and open the floodgates and have kind of the same resistance that organizations experience. And so we started with data, organizations like Mod Pizza, Brian said it too, JP Morgan Chase, although, banking, they also have a relationship called Policy Center on Criminal Justice that actually actively hires candidates with records. And so we actually dipped into that data pool to develop and looked at all the white paper information to go to and create, a justification pool to say, hey, this is what we want to do. And by doing so, we went into it as, hey, we really need to hire people. And we didn't just want to rely on one data source. We wanted a multifaceted recruiting tool. We armed the recruiters by saying, hey, don't just use Indeed to find candidates. Let's go to the community. Let's look for all different ways to identify top talent. And by doing so, we went to a variety of different organizations and had incredible success, not only from just making sure we're finding top talent, but identifying candidates that were loyal. And we created great retention tools with organizations like yours. And so by doing so, it created a feeder pool for us that has been incredibly successful and, quite frankly, the lifeblood of our recruitment department. So for us, it was like, hey, let's try something new. It ended up being something that was wildly successful. So for many organizations that are looking to start this, that was how it started, and it's continued to be wildly successful.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that it's so helpful for folks to just hear how did you do this? Often there's a will, but they don't know what the will is, right?
Right.
So, Brian, I know you see this a lot with the companies that you're working with. Can you give us an example or two of companies that have sort of thought about fair chance hiring and taken that first step, and how they're utilizing them to transform their workforce?
Yes, but I want to make a different point, which is I think companies come to this with a wide range of goals and wide range of starting points. And so, the JP Morgan example is very well known. And the CEO visited North Lawndale Employment Network and met some formerly incarcerated individuals who were inspired and went back to the bank and said, we're going to figure this out. And it took them 2 or 3 years and worked through all the internal processes and approaches. That's one extreme of a very large company. There's Grayston Bakery, which has its famous saying, which is, we don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people. And so they come at it from a very, very different perspective. So I just, I think what is common about all the examples I've seen is that there is some senior level commitment to, let's figure this out. And then one way or another, whether it's working with your colleagues and my colleagues, Kathleen, in our cohort program, or whether it's staffing up internally to figure this out, they've had to figure out then all the steps. And there are many steps. So, we can give people a place to start, but it depends on where you are and what you're trying to get to.
That's right. Thank you. And so, Joseph, have you had any conversations with companies? I'm just curious if you've seen some really good examples before we kind of switch over to our next question. Have you seen examples of good companies doing this in your work with the city?
Yeah, so I believe companies have been intentional about partnering with community-based organizations to tap into their talent pool, but I'm always advocating for. I've always have a bigger ask, and so I do not want to put any companies on the spot right now. I have been in conversation with them, and they're hoping. Our conversations have been going great so far, and we're looking to try to have something manifest from these conversations. So just like anything, I would hate to make an early announcement and it do not materialize. So I would like to see where these conversations go.
That's fair. Absolutely. And we'll be rooting for those companies to come through for sure. We've seen this in a number of ways at Cara too, to your point, Brian, that we have a number of companies that have just been incredibly thoughtful about fair chance hiring and how and what that looks like. We have folks who have changed job descriptions. To your point, Kelly, thought about revamping their applicant tracking system. And so we've seen a pretty significant a shift once folks have the opportunity to understand what the work looks like. And I agree with Brian, it doesn't happen overnight, right? But there's got to be that buy-in to say we can figure this out. There's no reason not to. Totally, at the end of the day, there's a big piece that's helping companies solve their talent problems as well, right? So how do we ensure that we're opening up that aperture to say, here's a whole talent pool that if we can just figure out how to help you change some things, you can help solve some of that bottom line there.
Catherine, let me add one thing, because I think I made it too glib in a way. It's not just we can. Those that have been successful that I've seen have said we're going to. They've taken hiring, fair chance hiring, as a business decision for whatever motivation. It may have started with the people motivation and it evolved to a business motivation, but they've taken it, made that decision like a business decision, which is to say, we're going to invest in this community, invest in this product, invest in this market, and we're going to figure out how to make it work. And there are going to be challenges that come up, but companies can figure that out if they're committed to making it work. What I think doesn't work, you didn't ask, this I would never use any names if I had them, but what I have seen is, well, we'll give it a try and see if it works. If it works, never works in a product, a market, a service, and it doesn't work here either. So it takes a commitment to making it work.
That's right. And I think it's deconstructing some of those phrases, right? That if it works, or we look at this on a case by case basis. I've heard this before. And you're like, well, that means no case, right?
It's not systematic if that's what you're doing.
That's exactly right.
And Kathleen, I'll add one point. We did try this 4 years ago and it didn't work. And it did take us a bit to get moving. And what did work, Brian, was building a bit of momentum, a bit of change management, a bit of getting advocates, getting allyship, getting people excited, visiting a Cara location, going through motivations, seeing what it did, having, individuals come through our sites and building a true partnership. And then, obviously introducing data along the way, but having a true partnership and explaining what would happen. It didn't happen overnight though, Brian, right? We didn't just say, hey, this is going to happen. Everything's going to be great.
And I'm curious, where was the impetus? Where was the impetus to say, okay, the first iteration wasn't a massive success. It took several years. Where did that impetus come from in the company?
It took, I'll be honest, a hiring manager. We had a number of our hiring managers and our leaders come to a motivation location, come to one of the motivation sessions at Cara, and they got to see firsthand the ringing of the bell that individuals go through when they obtain employment, and they got to see the impact that made. And then individuals from Cara came to our locations and got to do a realistic job preview. When they saw the connection and the impact that made, that's where they were hooked. They saw the real life, okay, you got me. There's inspiration, there's drive, there's excitement. I'm actually going to change someone's life, so now I'm in this. So the minute they felt the connection between the human interaction and the corporation coming together, and this wasn't just Kelly trying to get everybody excited with the recruitment team about something, they actually saw the human connection and the impact that it made. They were in lock and step. And so that's where the impact and the change came in. And now we can't get everybody to stop talking about it. So that's where it.
And you said, and as I recall, you started with the talent issue, that it's solving a business problem.
Right.
Like that's awesome, right? It's got the human side and the business side. That's awesome.
That's right. And like you said, Brian, companies come at it for a bunch of different reasons. And I think sometimes it takes a different kind of impetus to get that. And I just love that Motivations was able to do that for.
This is also a special one that it came from Cara Collective. I like that.
That's right. Exactly. So before we transition into our Q&A portion, I have one final question. In a sentence or two, what advice do you have for companies wanting to explore fair chance hiring? Brian, I'll start with you.
I'm going to do 3 sentences. Not exactly.
That's great. That's great.
The first is, and I'll just pick up on what we were talking about. Don't do let me try one and see if it works. Like, I just kind of know where that just don't do that. If you really want to do something, look at your look back period. I mean, Joseph, you mentioned the city did this. Now, it wasn't super simple, but but people can understand that and get their arms around it. I think the most interesting thing, and I'm just stealing liberally off of one of our partners who said this, is that how she got it going. Well, she's been public about it. It's Northwestern Medicine. She said, if you're interested, go in your company and ask why at least 3 times. And it's either why or is that really true? Why aren't we doing this? We're regulated. Is that really true? Well, not exactly. Well, why didn't we look at the regs? Well, we haven't had time. Well, just ask why 3 times. And I think you'll unpack a lot of really interesting stuff in your company.
That's really great advice. Kelly, what advice do you have for companies wanting to explore fair chance hiring?
Well, Brian, you always give so much information. I hate following you. I would say, really focusing on skills and not records. And for us, that really helped change the dynamic and change the talk track. So for us, if you could focus on skills and not records and partner with re-entry groups to really build stronger, more engaged workforces was kind of the talk track that really helped create the excitement and really helped us get people excited about the program and the connection.
That's great. Thank you, Kelly. I'll add your third in there, which is like go to motivations, right?
Yeah.
Or what Nike said, just do
motivations.
it. Just do it.
That will seal the deal, apparently.
Go to motivation. I completely agree.
Absolutely.
Kelly, you're not easy to follow either. I just want you to know that. Don't just put all that on Brian.
Yes.
But if I had to offer 3 pieces of advice, mine would be simple. It starts with an open mind and a commitment to action. And that action requires not just giving up after the first iteration, but recognizing that it will be some pain points in it. The second thing is to support and invest in a supportive workplace. I think that's important. Oftentimes the top level may be committed to it and it hasn't trickled down to the front line or the leadership staff, supervisory staff in the workplace. So create that supportive workspace. And Kelly, you touched on this, and I always have to follow up, was engage directly with people who have lived experiences. That can be those individuals who are leading and supporting this work in community-based organizations, as well as talking to those individuals who have been impacted in different ways. I think if you stick to this 3 and what was mentioned by Brian and Kelly, this would be a great starting point to creating fair chance that can be sustainable and systematic and not just symbolic.
Absolutely.
Amen.
And you're alluding to one of my heroes here, Brian Stevenson, who talks about the importance of proximity, right? And so I could not agree with you more, Joseph, of just getting to know people on the human level, which I think your colleagues on the call also alluded to. So I want to ask a couple of questions that have come up in the chat here. So one, have any of you had to, and maybe this is more towards you, Kelly, but curious, Brian and Joseph, if there's any relevance to this question as well. Have any of you had to make unanticipated changes to your onboarding process after implementing a fair chance hiring program? Or conversely, did you anticipate changes that never came up?
We did not have to make changes to our onboarding process, but we did have to re-educate our hiring or our HR business partners on the adjudication process. We talked a little bit about where companies have the upper hand and talked about, aligning the background check process with what's needed. And since we hire thousands of people at Lineage, last year we hired just shy of 20,000 people. And so ensuring that if you're hiring a person, you're aligning the background check to the job. And so re-educating our adjudication process to make that alignment. So that was a new change management process for our team. And to your point, Brian and Joseph, we just ensured that education was a small tweak for us. And so that was an exciting change and gave people a new opportunity for us here.
Absolutely. Brian, does this come up in your work? Have you heard of folks having to update any onboarding processes?
Yeah, I think what comes up the most is, even before onboarding, is the concern of what will our other employees think if we're hiring people with records. And it turns out that usually the other employees are excited about it, but that misperception is something people feel they're going to have to mitigate before bringing people on board, and it turns out to be poorly placed.
Right. And it's interesting because I think about we were talking earlier about some of the supports and additional supports that folks who are returning residents might need. And so how do you also, and I think about the work that Cara Plus does to help provide supports to managers of folks who are hiring, particularly at critical masses, to say, what is the kind of supports? What are some of the, warning signs that you might see, or just not even necessarily a warning sign, but something that might be an alert to ask a question in a different way to maybe get at what might be contributing to an interaction or a situation, right? And so
Kathleen, what you're talking about are really good managerial processes, really good, understanding what's going on. It doesn't matter if you have a record and you're living in where I live or in the South Side. That's the kind of in tune managers that actually will make everyone successful.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Because I think the last thing we want to do is other folks as well.
Yeah.
Joseph, please.
Yes. So that's being mindful, and oftentimes we don't want to further stigmatize individuals.
That's right.
So it's not like it's being communicated out to the rest of the workforce that, hey, this person is system impacted. I think a supportive team of the managerial supporting cast as well, if they're coming from a place like Cara, they're supported. I know you all accompany individuals through the work process. You don't just stop at once they obtain employment. You work through retention, and I think that's a great component of your program.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another question here from our listeners. What success story has stayed with you that truly shows the power of fair chance hiring, and what lessons can we take from it? I think Joseph told us his story already, which is amazing. But Kelly, yes, I saw your hand raised. Please.
I promise this is not a plant, but I was praying that someone was going to ask the question. I actually quoted it and I wrote it down because I was like, please let someone ask this. So this is actually a real quote from a Cara employee Cara team member that we hired here at our company. And this is a quote. "Things are going great here at Lineage. It's truly a life-changing experience for me. March 16th will be my 90-day mark here. All of my benefits will kick in, but I already have the best blank dental insurance here. I have an appointment with blank dental insurance this Saturday, and they're going to fix my teeth problems. Lineage insurance covered almost $7,000 of my bill. I'll start cross-training this week, and I love my work as a blank. The staff here is great. They treat me like family. I've made new friends already. Tomorrow, I'll be signing my lease at my new place, and I'll be moving in March 1st. I could not have done this without my Cara program and you, recruiter, at Lineage. I'll be forever grateful. I owe you all the world. Thank you for saving my life and giving me another chance." So, I mean, come on. So I printed this for the recruiter and I framed it for her because she did this. The recruiter did all of this. She made all of this happen. This is her reality. She invested all the time, effort, and energy with this program. And for me, this is what this is all about. And that's why I'm a huge advocate of this. I could get choked up talking about it because this is why we do this. And so that's why I was very grateful to be invited. And, that's the reason why I'm here. So that's my success story.
That is absolutely.
I'm not going after that.
Brian, I got you.
Kelly, that is an exciting story, and I am moved by it.
Absolutely, Kelly. Yes, please, Joseph.
Yes, not just speaking of myself and my own story, because there's countless other stories.
Right.
Many of you know, you've mentioned Willette Benford, who was also system impacted, who initially started as director of reentry. Many people know of Yacob Delaney, who's the deputy chief of staff for the lieutenant governor. It's so many others, but it's one story that stands out the most for me because it was an individual who served more than 2 decades of incarceration, was released, gained employment, and could have went on and lived his life in obscurity and never had to deal with it again. But no, he decided to give back. He continued his education, began to advocate and work in this field, and was allowed to go back into the same prison that he was incarcerated in to lead trauma-informed circles, healing circles. And I thought that was significant. And that was actually an example of what visual hope can be when we actually invest in those who are system impacted. So I think stories like that does not have to be one-off. We have the opportunity today to actually push corporations toward hiring from this population and creating millions more stories like this.
I couldn't agree more.
That's right. These do not need to be one-offs. I mean, the what you just shared, and Kelly, that story, I mean, and I promise this was not a plant, folks. That
I
was
know.
not a plant question in any way, shape, or form. But Kelly, I love that. Because I think also what we're learning too is that it's not just the individuals. We know the research shows you change that individual's life, you change their family, you change their community. It has reverberating effects. And so we know investing in folks through fair chance hiring truly has the power to change communities. I just want to take a moment here, unless there are any last questions. Okay, I think that's it. Just want to take a moment here to just thank our panelists and for all of you for tuning in. Thank you, Kelly, Brian, and Joseph for joining us. As we all know, Conversations with Cara is our series of discussions that we host throughout the year on topics around our work to eradicate poverty. We hope that you stay up to date on upcoming conversations, as well as the latest and greatest at Cara Collective by following at Cara Chicago on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and signing up for our newsletter at the link in the chat. You can also read our series of case studies. 2 of them are specific to fair chance hiring. At caracollective.org/case. And if you or your company are interested in joining an upcoming fair chance hiring cohort with the Corporate Coalition and Cara Plus, contact us at learn@caraplus.org. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us again, and make it a great day.